Okay, so let's say you've followed along to my last video searching for journal articles. You've found a few journal articles that are related to the constructs that you're going to be talking about and studying for your final project, your final paper. Now it's time to read your journal articles, summarize your journal articles, and incorporate them into the introduction to your paper. The first thing that you want to do is keep these 4 fundamentals of summarizing a journal article in mind. And I want you to think about these before you even read your journal articles. And we're going to go into each one of these individually later on. So just quickly, before you start reading your journal article, think about these 4 concepts. What did they do? What were they studying? How did they do it? So what did the participants do? And how were the constructs measured? The dependent variable, how was that measured? What did they find? What were the results? Was the hypothesis supported or refuted? And what does this all mean? How do I interpret it? So the first thing that I'm going to warn you all about is not to only read the abstract. And I know that's something that might be tempting. You have essentially a summary of the study right in front of you. It's your job to write a summary of your own. Well, the first thing that's important is to avoid plagiarism. And if you're writing a paragraph summary of your own and all you have to go off of is a paragraph, you're in definitely danger of doing that. But regardless of plagiarism, you're going to miss a lot of important things. You're going to miss how related this study is to your study and in which ways. You're going to miss the details of how things are measured, and it's important to get those figures across, those things across, and you're going to miss what their methodology was and if their methodology was sound. So please do read the abstract. You should have already done that when you printed it off, but you need to go a lot farther than that. So what I recommend is to, excuse me, like I said in the last slide, keep those 4 fundamentals in mind. Get your highlighters and pens, print out your study, and go over it by skimming it first and looking for those bigger points. And after you do that, especially if it's a study that you really want to dive into, I'd go back and then look at the details, then look at the finer points. And I think overall that's a good strategy to tackle your journal articles. Okay, so we're going to look at each part of writing a summary individually, and we're going to be doing that by way of a short description and through an example sentence that's going to be taken from a paper I wrote on mindfulness, the effects of mindfulness on confirmation bias, and the summary specifically was on the effects of mindfulness on the correspondence bias. And so the first thing we want to do is just tell people that, essentially. And you'll see at the bottom here we have Hopthrow et al. Investigated the effects of a mindfulness intervention on the correspondence bias, and where I can find that is near the end of the introduction, as well as their hypothesis of what they expect to find. And note here that I did an in-text citation, and I did this one way. There's other ways that you can do it. Just make sure to look up your APA conventions to make sure you're doing that properly. The second part of a summary is looking at how did they do it. So how did they actually go about conducting their study? What did they have the participants do? And then how did they measure their dependent variable? And this is something that's going to be described in great length in the method section, and it's your job to boil it down to a couple of sentences. And this will probably be the longest part of the summary, or I would expect it to be. And what I wrote for my summary was as follows. Participants of the study read a paragraph in support of or in opposition to nuclear power. That was the first thing they did. They were also told the writer of the paragraph was randomly assigned to their position. I felt that was important enough to include because it directly relates to the correspondence bias. And then I went into how the dependent variable was measured. After reading the summary, correspondence bias was measured by way of a single question. To what degree does the writer favor or oppose the use of nuclear power? And I also let readers know how those responses were recorded. So the next part of the study, we're interested in letting the reader know, what did they find? What were the results? And not surprisingly, we're going to be able to find this information in the results section. And after they might describe a lot of numbers, which especially the more stats classes you take and the more comfortable you get with the statistics, it's important to look at the actual numbers and see if they make sense to you, see if they're reporting effect sizes. But once you do all that, you go towards probably the end of the results section, and they'll tell you specifically what they found. And the example I have up here is those in the mindfulness condition attributed the writer's personal stance to their assigned position to a lesser degree than those in the control condition. Now, just reading that, I can tell that it might be a little convoluted to those readers who may not know much about the correspondence bias. So it's important to end our summary by clearing that up and letting folks know what that all means. And here we are. The final part of a summary is to describe what does it all mean. And as Carrie would always say, we want to explain it to grandma. We want to use simple English, and we want to let people know what we can take away from the study. And so to clear up kind of the sentence before, I did this by writing, this indicates a mindfulness intervention can reduce the tendency of people to minimize situational influences of others' behaviors. And to wrap it all up, we just take each part and we throw it all together to make our summary paragraph. And what I have below is number 1, what was the study about? Hop through it all, investigate the effects of a mindfulness intervention on the correspondence bias. How did they do their study? Participants of the study read a paragraph in support of or in opposition to nuclear power. They were also told the writer of the paragraph was randomly assigned to their position. After reading the summary, correspondence bias was measured by way of a single question. To what degree does this writer favor or oppose the use of nuclear power? Responses were recorded via a 7-point Likert scale. The third part is to give readers the results. Those in the mindfulness condition attributed the writer's personal stance to their assigned position to a lesser degree than those in the control condition. And we want to wrap it up and tell people what that all means and maybe how it relates to our study. This indicates a mindfulness intervention can reduce the tendency to minimize the situational influences of others' behavior. And if I had split up my introduction, and I think I did, by subsections, by the way that Carrie's kind of recommending that you guys do it, where I have a mindfulness section and a confirmation bias section, I would throw this in the mindfulness section probably towards the end because I'm narrowing down. This is a study that is very closely related to the study that I actually did, which was the effects of confirmation bias on mindfulness. And there you have it. And here was the original journal article in case you want to go investigate that yourself.